Hey everybody, welcome to conventioNOT podcast. Today's guest is Mitchell Stern, who is the co-founder of Station Cold Brew, a consumer packaged goods company that sells its products all around Canada. He gets really honest with us about becoming an entrepreneur, leaving a job to do so, as well as really talks and opens up about his struggles with anxiety and depression, something that affects almost all of us sooner or later in our pursuit of happiness. He also talks about his dedication to helping other entrepreneurs become who they want to be and dives really far into the endless satisfaction that comes from the pursuit of one's own passion. So, buckle in, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and listen to Mitchell talk to us.
Fun fact: when I was young, when we're kids, we always dream of doing all sorts of different things that are maybe unreasonable. I think at one point I wanted to be a professional wrestler, and I also had dreams at one point of being like a chicken wing taste tester. That's like an actual story that I told my dad one time, that's what I wanted to be. But more importantly and relevant to this conversation is I actually wanted to be on the radio for a really long time as a child, specifically talking about sports. And, I've had the opportunity to do a few podcasts over the past, couple of years, and it's just been kind of nice. And so here we are.
No, that's a pretty awesome way to at least get to, live that dream out, kind of not as a job, but you get to step into it and step back out of it when you feel like
great.
It.
I'm happy to be here.
So yeah, just to be clear, I want to do you justice and give you a brief little introduction here. Today we've got Mitch Stern from Station Cold Brew. Station Cold Brew is a very, very popular packaged beverage in Canada. As always, conventioNOT's about kind of different pursuits of success and happiness. And I definitely knew Mitch before Station Cold Brew. And I'd like, if he's comfortable with it, I'd love for him to kind of expand a little bit on the journey from then to now. And we're going to hone in on the business, of course. But like I said, I want to know a little bit about the man before he was the co-founder and VP of marketing and sales at Station Cold Brew. So Mitch, thanks for coming, brother.
Thanks for having me. It's interesting, the scenario we're in right now, because we haven't really had a good catch up in a while. And you most certainly knew me before I jumped into this endeavor. So the person I would say that you knew me then is completely different to the person I am now. So we can use this as a way to just catch up a little bit as well, which will probably lead to some really great conversation. But it's been about 5 years since we started our business. I've got two great partners who I've learned a tremendous amount with and from.
I feel like I came across something at some point that talked about like 2013. But like, when did you guys start sitting down, drinking beers, talking about it?
That was early 2014. That's okay. When it really started. And, the story is that my partner, Steve, was in New York and tried cold brew. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's got a couple other businesses. He came back to Toronto, did a little bit of research, cruised around, really realized that nobody was doing anything with cold brew. And for him, cold brew represented this really interesting new way to drink coffee. And, he was kind of a average coffee drinker, drank it mostly for functionality, but was and is a pretty healthy guy. So he, cares about what he puts in his body and didn't love the taste of coffee, but didn't like adding milks and sugars to it. So what cold brew was just an easy way to drink coffee and get that functionality, but tasted really great. And so he was really intrigued by the idea or the concept. And there's a few companies in the US at the time doing it.
In 2014, I mean, now not everybody's doing it, but it's changed a lot in the past 5 years, right? I mean, I guess almost 6 years. But totally. At that time, especially what you're saying in Canada, and some of our guests may not appreciate that. Like Starbucks in the US doesn't have the hold that like Tim Hortons has.
For sure.
So as much as Canadians love coffee, I don't feel like there was as much of a craze for like the small time coffee in Canada because it was so just Tim Hortons.
For sure.
You know, it ain't broke. Just put more Tim Hortons.
Yeah, no, it's
You're a European style.
Oh yeah. Mike. Yeah. Tim Hortons is real European. When we got Tim Hortons in Michigan, bro, that was a big deal. We were stoked. We were real stoked.
I was in Detroit 2 weeks ago and not only bought 2 pounds of Timmy H's, but it's like a morning stop for me. But I was referring to the Starbucks type, or Starcucks as it's known at my house. That was foul language really on here. Howard Schultz, who was a shade of who Mitch is, he bought that Aubon Pear company, and then he built the industry around European coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I now feel like it was a little bit too long-winded for an interruption, but I'm going to go back to you guys telling the story.
No, man, it's relevant. I mean, your comment about me and Howard in the same conversation is, I'll take it. But yeah, I mean, and so Steve recognized that there was a big opportunity, and it definitely took inspiration from 1 or 2 companies in the US, Stumptown being the most relevant. And he asked me what I thought of the idea. I had since left my job at a marketing agency. So I was working on both the accounts and the creative side with some pretty major brands in Canada, the US, managing some experiential campaigns for, Dell computers and Walmart. I like to tell a quick story around, I actually went down to Walmart's head office in Bentonville, Arkansas. And that sort of led to my demise with that agency. The actual realization, and it sounds cliche, but I stick to the story, is that I was just really stressed at that time. And I had a moment down in Bentonville thinking, why am I so stressed about this company, this organization that I really don't have any connection to? And, if I don't go to work tomorrow, as much as I thought I was doing a great job, the company will be fine. And so that led me to really start to understand and think more about, fulfillment in my professional career. And, it didn't lead me to knowing what that was. And the truth is I still don't know what that is, but it led me to realizing that what I was doing wasn't it. And I think that's really important. And that was a good lesson for me, is sort of trial by error and realizing what you don't want to do, or what you do want to do by finding things you don't want to do. Right. So I had left my job, and Steve and I knew each other through some friends, and he approached me and asked if I wanted to sort of consult on starting a cold brew brand. And we really didn't even get into details of what that looked like, or what our end goal was, or what we were going to do with it. And we didn't really have any strategy, truth be told. It was just like, all right, this seems like a pretty cool product. We think the people of Toronto would really like it, and maybe we should start a consumer packaged goods business with no relevant experience whatsoever.
That's audacious, man. I love it.
But I talked about this the other day. I think what I've realized is the best part about it, and the most important part for us in that time and in that conversation, and in the following conversations, was that we didn't overthink it. We didn't have the experience to, we were very naive. And I think that actually served a very good purpose for us. I really do. It allowed us to just kind of like go with it and do what felt right. And it obviously led to some really cool stuff. And our third partner, who's potentially the most important part of the three, his name is Mike. He comes from the coffee world. So he's been a roaster. He had been making cold brew on a very small scale in a cafe setting, essentially. And he's the one who, he's our brewmaster.
That's a technical guy, right?
Correct. So Steve, CEO, I'm marketing and sales, and Mike's sort of the operations and technical production guy. We rented a space in like a commercial kitchen. We were buying bottles from this bottle shop in Toronto and hand stickering labels on these bottles, and like riding around on our bikes and delivering cold brew to accounts. And that's really like
friends.
Yeah, that's how it started.
Yeah, no, I remember those early days.
Yeah. And that was really the beginning. And it's one thing I've realized is it's amazing to have these conversations, especially with old friends. You spend most of your days in the weeds and essentially problem solving and trying to figure out what's not working. and you don't take enough time to look back at the things you did well and understand, maybe some of the decisions you made and why did you make them and what, where did that lead you? And so
I think you drive forward by nature when you are entrepreneurial, right? Because even though everybody doesn't get the like grassroots experience of riding a bike to deliver a product that or I'm sure at that point in time, you had some hand in brewing. I think that there's an analogy for each entrepreneur in that way, but it's almost like we're programmed to jump past that point as soon as we can and then forget it and invent a new problem. And that in its nature is what creates entrepreneurial endeavors. But it's weird. And I think we found that through the show a bunch of times. It's weird to like sit down and recount it.
Totally.
We think our memoirs will exist at age 60. Right. And I don't think that age is really that important at this point in time when you're in the middle of your career from a number perspective. But often the memoirs, I think, especially with the digital age that we have, we could sit down and record those and pass those along now because they're way more inspirational. And then like a lot of people just don't fucking know. Right. I mean, I've not been inside your facilities or anything, but I have read a little bit about your culture, which seems to be really impressive. And I'm sure that part of that is that your teams know you, but at the same time, they don't get to know you from end to end in the same way that something like this might.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've done our best to foster a culture internally of just transparency and authenticity. And, those are words that are thrown around a lot now, but it's true. Like yesterday, we actively internally talked about, it was World Mental Health Day. So I encouraged our team to like talk about it. And that type of stuff is really important to us. And I think that over the years, we've built what I believe to be a really solid foundation as a business and as a brand, because that's the type of both internally and externally community and culture that we're trying to build. And, we, since day one, like doing events and music festivals and really just having real conversations with people, I think that's really led to something special. And, we still all believe in it so much that we're grinding every day.
You think of that as your neighbors and people that live across the street, but as an entrepreneur and someone who's developing a business, like that sustains, those things sustain fads, those things sustain trends. I think it's appropriate to put the emphasis on that, secondary to quality.
Sure.
But other than that, I mean, and that's clear in your product. You said you and Steve sitting down talking about potential marketing type ideas was kind of the beginning, but Bentonville sounds more like the beginning to me. And it also allows me to take you back in time a little bit to, when was that?
11 or 12, maybe. I had spent about 5 years with my agency, and, the best part is that most of my best friends came from that time. So when I met you, Mitch, you were, and this is by no means, I met a lot of people that were in marketing in Toronto. And there was a lot of you. I don't know why that is a very abundant profession in the city, I suppose. But you guys all seem to be kind of running a similar race. You all seem to be doing pretty well for yourselves. I knew you had a couple close friends that were in the industry. You guys seem to have fun. You seem to, but your jobs were just your jobs. And that's, again, not a put down to the industry. But I knew quite a few people in Toronto that were in the world of, and I'm just being generic because it's not my field, but just say marketing in general. And you guys had jobs, but there wasn't as much of like, I want to do this forever. I mean, there's a handful. I knew some people like that had that passion. And again, it's not specific to that type of work. It's specific to that work in that maybe environment, to like, you're just part of a herd. I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess I'm really curious about, you said specifically Bentonville. And I know you're pretty, and I don't mean to keep beating up on Walmart, but it's like they let you see how the hot dogs were made. That was it. That was the final straw. Well, keep in mind, there's going to be a time probably pretty soon that I'm going to go try to sell my product to Walmart. So I got to be careful what I say here.
No, so it's got nothing to do with Walmart.
Yeah, of course.
That's what I'm getting at. And you touched on something there, mental health, and you touched on your own experience and just kind of professionally reaching your not breaking point, I don't want to call it that, but that serious fork in the road, that turn. To some people, that feeling that's like breakdown. That's I'm done. There's nothing else. And what gave you kind of the confidence, the comfort to walk away from that? Because I know you're still getting a paycheck, right?
Oh, for sure. And I certainly went the other way in regards to my paycheck and security. And, the truth is thinking back, I didn't really, I didn't really think that much about it, which is interesting for me because I'm generally the opposite, where I'm overanalyzing things. And that leads to, being completely transparent, like lack of commitment in life in general, because I'm constantly weighing options, and that's something that I'm hyper aware of for myself personally. But this was something that, looking back, it was just kind of like it just very naturally happened, and it felt right. And I had the support of the people around me in that. I remember a conversation with my VP at the time, and just a very open and honest conversation. I think that led from just that's the type of person that I am. Is I'm pretty unabashed, and I'm usually good to talk about most things and not afraid to share how I'm feeling and be vulnerable. And I think that led to this conversation with my VP at the time, where he just said, I think I can tell that you're not really happy here. Like, how do we work through this together to make sure that everybody wins? Right. I'm forever grateful for that conversation, because that led to me accepting and maybe being like, oh, this actually might be the path that I should take. Whereas if I never had that conversation with him, there's a chance that I wouldn't have admitted that to myself, or wouldn't have taken that chance, or had the support of him. I think that was really, really important. And even as I'm talking about this, I'm like, wow, that was a very important piece to the puzzle for me, for sure.
Amazing to have that support from someone. I mean, I'm sure he wasn't keen when you told him you were walking out the door, but just to have the littlest bit of understanding from someone you admire, or have been at least taking orders from. I remember a similar experience when I was leaving Toronto. Like, it was really hard to leave, and they could have made it a lot harder. But instead, there was just, the door will probably be open in the future, but we get it. You got something else under your skin, and go do what you got to do.
And don't get me wrong. Like, in that moment, I certainly wasn't thinking about it the way I'm thinking about it now. Like, that was a tough moment to admit that to myself and try to even fathom what I was going to do next, or where I was going to go. It was really my first job out of university, and
you were there for a bit. Right?
Yeah. And I was there for a bit, and I was still pretty young, and
all your buddies were in that industry, right? Like, it was, no, that's what I mean. I remember going to your place for like house parties, and it was just like, wait, you work with all these people? Yeah. It was like college just after college.
So what's interesting for me too is I didn't really experience college the way that many do, in that, like, I lived at home, and so this kind of became my college, which
you guys did pretty good recreating college. I mean, the couple parties I went to, they were, I don't want to say unsophisticated, but they were fun. They were a lot of fun.
And branding and advertising, or marketing, as Mikey calls it, is like, sure. It kind of is that, right? I mean, it is an extension of college. It is, in addition, I went to advertising school too. My first company that I started was an advertising company that failed miserably, actually. But ultimately, like, it is a little bit of staying a kid. And then there are, man, I'm really typecasting everybody in that demographic, but there is this like childhood graduated type of mentality that I think at least a lot of my friends and a lot of my entrepreneurial friends were in or in marketing and branding, and then are now in either tech or design or software. And so what I think happens at some point is you're like, fuck, man, I don't want to be like 46 doing blow on Thursday night in an advertising copy room, to take that effort and to dive it into a single product instead of building brand after brand after brand after brand. If you're somebody who's I assume you're at least a little bit great, or at least the trifecta of you, Steve, and Mike together, Mitch, are really, really great at what you do. Is that like, if you can find a team or you can break away on your own, you can start to just do it for yourself in a lot of ways. Because you probably didn't make dick anyway in your mid-20s.
No, it's very much just like a really aggressive work hard, play hard industry. And I see that all the time. And that is for some people, and some people can go with it. But the truth is that I'm really grateful that I didn't go with it. Specifically, again, bringing it back to like my mental health, because I oftentimes get into moments of severe overwhelm. That's how my anxiety kind of manifests itself. I know that would be a challenging place for me to play with where I'm at now.
Did you know that much about how your mental health was affecting you at that point in time? I mean, obviously, as you mature, you learn more. Or was it more of like a gut feeling at that point when you left the corporate world?
This will probably lead to a much greater conversation, which I'm happy to talk about. But the interesting thing is that no, I absolutely was not aware. And I'm more aware of that now than I ever have been. And the reason is because during that time, for most of my 20s, I was actually on medication for anxiety and depression, which, antidepressants kind of numb you completely, right? So they take away those really high highs and those really low lows, and they serve a purpose in certain circumstances. Coincidentally, and I've only really started to think deeply about this lately, is that when I left, I also came off my medication. I entered into the world of entrepreneurialism and started to learn about the really high highs and the really low lows of that world, while also personally starting to learn about the really high highs and the really low lows, because I had taken myself off this medication, which thinking back to it, I think the parallel of those two things happening at the same time was really important for me, and still is, because it's like understanding and just learning to live with both of them. And when people ask me sort of like, what's your biggest lesson so far? I just say, like, you got to appreciate those highs and be grateful for them and live in them, and, maybe take a step back and give yourself credit, like we talked about before. And in the lows, just, know that it's not forever, and it's cyclical, and understand, maybe what were the decisions that made you get there. And that can be applied to both professional and personal life. So I certainly didn't have that awareness back then. And I'm actually happy that I didn't, because I don't know if I would have made the same decisions.
Did you move to another practice? Did you move to meditation, or did you move to running, or did you move to some sort of physical kind of engagement at that point in time? Or was it, hey, I'm starting this company now, and I'm making this life decision, which is a big fucking decision, especially, at like quarter life crisis, right? Where you're about 25 or so, and you're like starting to figure it out. Like, how did you go there? Did you replace it with something? Did you just start smoking cigarettes nonstop or something? Or like what?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly wasn't cigarettes, and I'm very thankful for that. And that actually probably would have been in the days of working at the agency. So again, I think it's very similar to what I said before about being naive. I didn't really think too much about it, and I kind of just was rolling with it. That being said, there's definitely a lot of things that along the way I've understood are tools that are really important to keeping that sort of calmness or focus in moments of high or low or whatever. And, exercise is really important to me. Sure. Meditation is something that I think like a lot of us now, which is great, are exploring and, trying to add as a routine. Meditation can also look like many different things. It can be sitting in silence with your eyes closed, with your legs crossed, sure. But, I find meditation in having wonderful conversations like this. I find, and to me, meditation is just about presence and just being in the moment. Conversations with people and surrounding yourself with people is a tool that I've used many times. And it's easier said than done. When we're in moments of sadness or isolation, that's kind of what we do, is we kind of like isolate ourselves, right? Meanwhile, we all know, or a lot of us know, and hopefully more people day by day know, and I certainly learned this, is that the opposite is actually true. Those are the moments where you should actually reach out to a friend or family and just be like, I feel like shit.
Right.
And can we talk about it?
Mm-hmm.
I'm aware of that. I try to push myself through those moments. Doesn't always happen, of course.
You eloquate the topic much better than most people do. And I think the reality is that most of us only have a handful of people, and maybe even less than that, that we're comfortable being that internal, that raw version of ourselves with. And I got to say, it's so good to have you on here with your background, your experience, talking about these topics. Because to be honest, like that's a lot about what Ryan and I initially set out to do here. You know, we were those guys for each other. And don't get me wrong, Ryan, I feel bad. You're not the only friend I have that I was able to be that way with, but that's really valuable. And I always talk about this. I swear it comes up with every single guest we ever have, is that when you have those people in your life, whether it's a coworker, whether it's a mentor, whether it's a childhood friend, identify it when you can and don't let it go. You know, like ultimately skills and abilities, all of that, you're always going to need a support. You know, you're always going, ideally, a support system. You know, the more the merrier. I think it's amazing nowadays that there's much less of a stigma. You know, I think the stigma is the worst part about it, you know, just as men and this and that. And the more we talk about it, the more that's removed.
I think it's, you know, you mentioned it for males for sure. You know, I think that's an important topic of conversation that, you know, generally speaking, society has taught us that we're supposed to be strong and not be vulnerable. And those are two sides of the coin. And I firmly believe that they are on the same side of the coin, and we can be both. And here we are. You know, it's also relevant for entrepreneurs, right? Like there's so many sort of segments where mental health and this conversation is really, really important, which is why I do try to talk about it openly. If you identify like one person that you can just be real with, that's a good place to start. And something that always grounds me when I do go into that mode of, isolation, or, you know, nobody understands what I'm going through, or whatever story I'm sort of telling myself. The thing that grounds me is just knowing that, like, you can assume that person, or your friend, your family, whatever, is probably going through something similar, or has gone through something similar, or has had the similar thoughts. Yeah. So the chances of like them not getting it or judging you are pretty slim, especially if they're those people you've identified in your life. Because I think that's the reason we probably don't talk about it, is because of what we've been taught and because of fear of judgment.
Well, and the reciprocation of vulnerability is engagement. And engagement is this really kind of...
That's a good quote.
It's this weird... Fuck, man, I sound like a complete hippie stoner, but I'm gonna say it anyway. It's this weird like amalgamation of being able to have time to be engaged, care enough to be engaged, and then frankly, just like remember enough or be in the right place at the right time to engage with that person, right? Because we're a little bit scared to both be engaged and to ask somebody to engage with us, right? So like that vulnerability part is one part of it. Like, okay, I'm vulnerable. That's a decision I make. Now, in order to engage with somebody else, now there's a whole other decision of like this energy exchange.
We've talked with a lot of entrepreneurs, and Mitch, I've heard you speak on it on other podcasts, just that wave, you know, which is kind of parallel to, again, I keep saying mental health, but it's just life, right? We all go through that roller coaster and ride that wave.
Mental health is a spectrum.
Exactly. And because our guests are typically, you know, in the entrepreneurial arena, I think that's a little bit more of a rocky ride than other professions can be. So I've had a number of people be pretty open about like, yeah, no, I've gone through some struggles.
Yeah.
But on the outside, it's a lot of times the people struggling the most seem like they're having the most fun. You know what I mean? And it's not always recognizable. And you know, I have to compliment, you know, maybe a couple of your buddies, and I know you have a tight family system there. Just being a dude in your late 20s that maybe doesn't want to party as much, and maybe wants to chill out a little. Like that's not real popular ever. I don't care what industry you're in, what market you're in, what you're doing. So that, to have that system and to have those buddies. I mean, Mitch, not to completely dilute this very valuable and incredible conversation, but dude, I think the first time we hung out, I actually was thinking the other day, I know we met at Totem. I never worked out there, but like I would go and, so that's how I actually met Mitch, and a good friend of his named Mark. I had to name drop Mark at some point here today. But I'm pretty confident the first time we hung out was a girlfriend of ours was having a going away party. So we were hanging out in an apartment, and then we went to a nice little bar called the Underground. Mitch was a real likable guy right from the start. Plus I had heard, only really good things from Nicole about him. And his buddy Mark was a little bit, I don't want to say more outgoing, but Mark was a little bit sillier. So I was getting a kick out of talking to these two guys. And then somehow we came across the topic of college football, which again, I'm an American living in Toronto. So like they have college football in Canada. And I'm not trying to be insulting here, but it's just nothing against the players, but there's not an appetite for it.
Just different.
Admitted my deep love for it, and Mitch shares it. So we literally we found that commonality, and nothing else mattered at that point. It was one thing to love college football, but to our Midwest listeners, you'll appreciate. So Ryan and I are Michigan State graduates. That's the green and white team, the Spartans. There's another team in the state of Michigan called the University of Michigan Wolverines. That's the blue and yellow team. Well, Mitch's older brother, I believe, went to university in the state of Ohio called Ohio State University, which is the Buckeyes.
Wait. Called the Ohio State University.
I don't think they got the
Go Bucks.
So
Thank you.
I don't know if they get, but anyways, I know they did file for it.
They filed for it. That's good enough.
Anyways, long story short, there's a real big brother, little brother, cross-state rivalry thing going on here. So Michigan State hates Michigan, but Michigan acts like Michigan State can't hold its jockstrap, and all their angst and aggression is towards Ohio State. So if there's one thing shared amongst those three schools, it's that Michigan State fans and Ohio State fans hate University of Michigan. So that was just it was a beautiful ground to sprout a relationship. I mean, we really hit it off right away.
Well, I mean, I imagine for you, like Mark and I can talk about college football. My dad's American, so I grew up watching the sports. Like I didn't play hockey growing up. Yeah. I grew up watching baseball and football. Like that was what I grew up watching, and that's what I still watch. But I spent many of my weekends in my university days driving to Columbus to visit my older brother, who was in medical school there at the time, just to go to Buckeye games. And I have seen Michigan State lose twice there, just for the record. But I've also, more importantly, seen Michigan lose there. And I was fortunate to go to some pretty epic games. But
I bet. Yeah, no, it's a good time to be an Ohio State fan for sure.
I think the last 20 years has been a good time to be an Ohio State fan.
Never a bad time. But
yeah. So anyways, that's the story of how we met and bonded over college football. And
yeah, I remember the start of the night. I can't say I remember how it ended up. But probably like most of them. We got out of there okay. There were some laughs. I think that was Steph's going away.
Oh, interesting.
Remember they had all those mustaches?
I do actually remember that.
They were wearing that night. Yeah, we could find a date on that. Maybe this will get Steph to listen to this podcast.
There you go.
Let's see if we can find a photo for the episode cover as well. Maybe later on that evening.
I wouldn't be surprised if one does exist somewhere. I mean, it's going to be Mitch, Mark, and I with like 10 girls wearing mustaches. So that's actually
pretty much like every evening in your 20s for both of you gentlemen, which I think is a great segue to move just a little bit further on, not quite to today, but one of the things that I've been learning about recently, I'm in the world of software, which inevitably means that in the world of capital, Mitch, down here. And I have always forever wanted to talk to somebody who won capital in a contest format like you guys did. And so a lot of people don't know if you grow up in Detroit, you watch Canadian television. So like Channel 9 is always like the station that you go to if you can't find local shit. So you know a little bit about the Dragon Show, but the Dragon Show, for those of our listeners who aren't.
What is it? Dragon's Den? Sorry, Ryan. Dragon's Den is what it's called, right?
Dragon's Den on CBC, if I remember correctly. But ultimately, it's very similar to what we watch here, which has become this institution called Shark Tank, right? And so, again, my world often like centers around boards coming in financial analysis and revenue analysis and all this shit. And I have been dying since I learned you were coming on the show to ask you this question, which is, how does it work to get like celebrity money? To me, the dollar amounts and all those things aren't important. What I really want to hear about is like taking a product that's so heavily on branding. And I can like feel Mikey's eyes rolling because I rolled right to the left into business, which always happens.
No, I'm not.
Away from that. But like ultimately, like taking a product that's so closely tied to branding, like how does that work, man? I mean, you won the show. Give us some details about that. But give me a little bit of that snapshot and like how that involvement has happened over the past little while.
Sure. So it is, essentially the Canadian version of Shark Tank. There are some differences. Shark Tank is a little more, how do I put this? A little more Hollywood in that there's a little more focus on the celebrity side of it.
We just call that American. It's a little more American. You can say it. It's okay.
The Canadian one, the people. Actually, now that I'm saying this, I think with Shark Tank, a lot of the people, the investors were famous before. I think Dragon's Den, some of the people became famous because of Dragon's Den, because they're a little more focused on the business side of it. But that being said, it is a very similar concept in that, entrepreneur or entrepreneurs pitch their idea to a panel of, experts who are also investors and they ask for money. It's a public version of an investor pitch, essentially, made for television, of course, which is very important. So we identified Dragon's Den as something we could consider. We had some colleagues who had done it, who had given us some really good advice and said why you should or shouldn't do it. We actually got a phone call from Dragon's Den pretty early in our endeavor, and they asked if we were interested, which I thought was interesting. Now, at the time, we weren't, so we declined, and it kind of came up in conversation every now and then. And then one day, we were facing the struggles that we oftentimes face in terms of funding, and decided that, maybe it was a good idea to consider. Now, we weren't in trouble by any means, but we said, you know what, what's the worst that can happen? So, the interview was interesting because we were actually, so the CBC studios is where it was held. They're downtown Toronto. Across the street is the convention center. And that same weekend, we actually had a trade show that we were doing at the convention center. So halfway through the day, when it was our time, me, Mike, and Steve literally like picked up a bunch of our stuff from our booth at this trade show, rolled it across the street, including like a bunch of products, went and pitched. We get into the little room with the judges. It was actually a room where there's like a bunch of different tables. And the two judges, as soon as we get there, we're like, cool. Well, first we want you to try our product. Like, let's just start with that.
Sure.
And they were like, oh, we don't drink coffee. But what was interesting was the judges next to it, because it was a very open concept and there were people standing next to us pitching their product. The two judges next to us interrupted the people who were pitching them and turned and they were like, oh, I tried that stuff. I love that stuff. Can I have one? And then I remember I was in Vancouver for business about a month later and they were like, hey, we've selected you to be on the show. We're going to be filming on April 30th. And the reason I remember that date is because that's my birthday. We did then really start to dive into our pitch, and we identified that there were three priorities for us going on this show, and they were identified in this order. The first of which was just getting to know your business in that level of detail is something that you need to do, especially at that point. We started to understand that we can't self-fund this forever. We've got big dreams and aspirations. It will take funding from other people or outside funds or whatever. And
you guys are at cash flow, not revenue.
Yeah. And so we just decided that, really diving into the business and knowing every detail, all of us back to front, is a good thing to do. So first and foremost, let's do that. Second was the exposure. There's no question that a lot of people and brands and companies do it strictly for marketing purposes and start to understand, just getting in front of people and being able to tell your story on television. Fantastic. And the third priority was the money and a deal. We spent a little while working with the producer who works with you to craft your story, to really, the way it works is you go in there, the first, I think it was 90 seconds to 2 minutes is uninterrupted. So that is when the entrepreneurs or the business owners get an uninterrupted period of time to say what they want to say. That first 90 seconds is so important to set the stage.
Yeah.
So we worked on that for a long time. And, I remember this was a good lesson for me. I remember we all had our parts, and I remember I kept trying to memorize my part. And we held things at my house where friends would come over and they would act as dragons, and we were like pitching to them and practicing. And every single time I was practicing, I fucked it up. Like I'm not even, really? And I would beat myself up for it. And like until
you're the sales guy,
until the morning of, we were like walking onto the stage, and Steve turned to me and he's like, are you going to be okay? Like, are you going to be okay? And I had a moment where I was just like, I took a deep breath and I was like, I know what I want to say. I'm just going to say it in however way it comes out. We did really, really well. They didn't ask us half the questions we thought they would. We didn't have to get into, but they loved us. The response was fantastic. And it was interesting because they set you up, and when they send you the package and the details on the day of filming, it's like you show up at 6 a.m. and you need to be prepared to be there till 10 p.m. because they're filming all day and they don't know what order. And so I kind of schmoozed our producer in saying, look, A, it's my birthday, and B, we're a coffee product. So I want to be the first one on set. The way it went was it was so smooth. It felt like we were in another meeting with like a Whole Foods, and we were just kind of like talking about what we talk about every day. And it felt very comfortable and easy. And we were successful. So we did get a deal on the air. A couple of the investors sort of fought over us, which was great.
Nice.
There were a few different offers on the table, and it just, like, thinking back, it just went so smoothly. I'm really, really happy that it did that. And we had met with a few other entrepreneurs that we knew who were on the show prior, and they basically said the first thing was, if you get a deal on the air, you're going to come off and they're going to get you to sign something, and just don't sign it first and foremost. Like, okay. And I would like to think that I wouldn't have done that anyways, but that advice was still very sound advice. So of course we came off and they interview us, and then they're like, here's some paperwork. And we said, great. Well, we'll have our lawyers review this. Thank you very much. And then we went through a little bit of a due diligence period where we sat down with the investor multiple times, talked about what we want to do together and where the opportunities are, and strategic vision and all that stuff. And I'm sad to report that it did not go through. I think we were probably in there for about an hour. There's no way that either side can learn enough about the other side in an hour to want to A, give up part of your company, or B, invest hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars.
So it turns out just like dating shows.
Yeah, I imagine so.
You can't figure out a happily ever after story.
They don't get married
at that moment. So did you guys ever take capital?
So what happened after that is it actually opened up a lot of conversations, and we were obviously prepared to have those conversations, which in and of itself was such a great practice for us to be in. And we ended up taking a small amount of money from, we just call it sort of our seed round. It was, kind of friends and family. It's kind of a bit of a catch-22. And then on the other side, you're we're not paying ourselves a lot and we're like, grinding it out and bootstrapped. And so there's a fine line, but we've certainly recognized that we're at a bit of a tipping point in that we have an opportunity to continue to really grow. And that is our team,
Wow.
innovation, growing distribution, perhaps eventually getting to the US, which is a big part of our plan. And growing our brand outside of actually just cold brew coffee. So we've recognized that we're not a coffee company. We're a functional beverage company. And that has led me to focus a lot of my time on innovation and what the future looks like. And it's really, really exciting for me because that's where my creativity can really start to come out. And I've got some pretty big plans on what I want to do, but it requires some capital. So
I have to imagine 3 or 4 years later, the impetus for cash is still there, which is to scale and to grow, right? Like it's so easy to equate those two things. Mm-hmm. But the organization and the team that you three have built has to be dynamically different. Having built revenue, having continued to invest, and then kind of coming on to that point, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's so many horror stories that exist, sure. If not more horror stories than not.
For sure. Yeah, totally. And it's a constant, struggle to understand what the next move is, right? It's, mm-hmm. and we don't know. This is a good time for us to talk because like we're in 2020 planning right now, and there's some like big conversations happening, conversations that we haven't had before around what the future looks like. And it's scary as hell, but it's also exciting. On my walk this morning, I actually had this moment where I was like, we're making some decisions around packaging and some big stuff. And I had this moment where I was like, this bring up a lot for me. I feel a lot of fear in making these decisions. And then I had this moment where I was like, well, that will probably lead to something good, whether it's learning or success or whatever. So I was like, okay, I had that awareness to be like, those are the things you got to push through. And, a lot of people, myself included, many times in the past and present, it's hard to push through those things. But I was just like, no, I got to push through this.
It is. I mean, it's scary as hell, but not to get crazy here or too detailed, but those receptors are right next mm-hmm. to the excitement, in the brain. And like that level of fear, I think for a lot of people, like those emotions you're feeling this morning, 5-6 years ago, that's, oh man, where do I find a place to push this down into right. and pretend isn't right. there? And like, that's the ultimate ulcer that grows and turns into anxiety and all these mm-hmm. awful feelings.
Think about how many good ideas are soaked up by ulcers.
For sure.
Exactly. Like you said just being mm-hmm. aware of it, like just kind of facing that stuff. I think we all go through it, but unfortunately, like you don't do that sure. at 25. I mean, if you're really fortunate, it usually kind of has to come with some experience and some hard times. And I mean, it's so amazing, Mitch, to be able to talk to you now, because I agree. You're at a different part of your life now than you were when I met you and knew you. Well, you're not a different person. Yeah. You're still the same solid guy I always knew. It was great and easy to talk to.
But I'm very aware that I live a very privileged life in that I have family to rely on. Like if our business went under tomorrow, which it will not, I will be fine. And I actually I learned this lesson from Steve early on, and that is just play worst case scenario. And the good news for me, and I'm very happy about this, is my worst case scenario is that I would have to move out of my apartment, but I would have a family who would take me in and I would figure it out,
But it helps to have been there before a little bit, right? Like you've been in a position where you walked away from a salaried mm-hmm. position that gave you some amenities of success. I'm just using that word kind of sarcastically, but yeah, at this point you're like, enjoy this ride while it lasts. I'm not going to take you for granted. If the tracks end, I'll find another ride, right? Like it's
build another ride.
Exactly.
But what's interesting too is I oftentimes think about this and I'm like, okay, why am I stressed? And it's a very similar feeling to what I had about Walmart, where I was like, I'm stressed. If I don't do my job, they're going to be fine. But like, the truth is we're still selling a consumer packaged good product. Like I'm not changing the world or anything like that. So the truth is like, is it really that big of a deal? So what? But what does ground me in continuing to get excited and be excited about what we're doing is, for me personally, and my partners would have different answers, I imagine. But for me personally, a lot of my job is something that is a creative outlet for me. So I get to implement my creativity through our brand and the aesthetic and the packaging and the innovation and all that sort of stuff, which is important for me and fulfillment for me. But also something I've thought about lately is we're not changing the world for sure, but our product does support people in doing amazing things. And that could be a construction worker or an engineer or just a mom who has had a new baby and needs to stay awake. And we get people who like send us messages on Instagram all the time saying like, your coffee helped us through, the first 3 months of our baby's right. And so that actually brings me tremendous amount of fulfillment and joy, because I'm like, all right, cool. We're selling coffee in a can, but it's helping people do some awesome things who may be changing the world.
But to feel that as a reward for you on a daily basis, like just so people know that CPG acronym you guys keep throwing around, I had to look that up, dude. Like that means what? Consumer packaged good?
Yep.
So that's a crazy industry. Mitch makes something that he sells to the public. Ryan and I don't do that. We produce a product, but it's for, usually your eyes only. Oh, that came out really wrong. It's more confidential.
What kind of movies are you making? I don't know.
I was going to say, no, that came out wrong. Edit that. But in that, I like this because it segues into, like, Ryan, you touched upon it, that Mitch, at your heart, you're a creative. From your perspective, because I know you need to be educated on the technical components and the business side of things, and I really commend you because you're very well versed in that stuff. But at the end of the day, you want to like go home and work on labels and stuff, right? And like work and like think about culture and like that. Those sort of like that's your wheelhouse.
This is the scientist setting you up. It sounds like you're setting Mitch up, you motherfucker.
I'm not. I swear.
So these other guys, they make all this real nice stuff, and then you go home and play with stickers and markers, right, Mitch?
That's me. And to be honest, I really appreciate things that I'm unable to do.
Yeah, that is true.
Like,
that is
if
true.
It's reaching something up on a wall, I'm pretty good at that. But if it's making a brand and like that stuff scares me, man. That's naked in front of an audience presentation type stuff. Like, so those to appeal to the public in that way, like I just like that stuff blows my mind. That's why I'm such a fan of graffiti and all that stuff, because I can't do it. I'm totally unable to be expressive and kind of enjoyable in that way. But I give you so much credit, and like that, I think from the get-go, the brand opened itself up to be way more than just coffee, and I can tell that's kind of where you're headed. And like that was pretty impressive to not pigeonhole yourself from the get-go. And
we did pigeonhole in that our logo actually said Cold Brew Coffee Co. in it.
Yeah.
But if you go to our website, we've actually changed our logo.
Station, right?
It's just Station, right? Yeah. And that is because we're moving into iced tea, and we'll be moving into some other products. And
that, like, not to kind of trivialize it down to brick and mortar aspirations, but can you go into a little bit like I've heard you talk a little bit about CBD. I've heard you talk. I know the iced tea is a new thing. Like, what? I don't expect you to let me see behind the scenes, but what sort of like big, hairy stuff is in the future for Station?
Well, for right now, we're launching these iced teas, which is actually really exciting for us. And the reason is that the iced tea category is like full of garbage. Like there's nothing that is, so here's the general idea of what's happening in beverage is that there's a massive shift into what we call functional beverage, right? And that is people moving away from Coke, Pepsi, Red Bull, Monster into kombucha, coconut water, cold pressed juice, all of these beverages that are better for you and oftentimes have functionality. But the iced tea category, there's really nothing. And so we came across this product called Cascara, which is, so when coffee grows, it's actually a fruit, right? Yeah. Most people don't even realize that. It's coffee fruit. The seed is the bean. that we know as the coffee bean, which is sort of like opened up and taken out and then processed and shipped and roasted and then you do whatever with it. The rest of the coffee fruit, there's a few different layers, but one of them, the skin around it or the husk, is called cascara. And traditionally, it's been sort of just tossed by coffee farmers to compost or to livestock. It's got a beautiful flavor profile. It has a ton of antioxidants, and there's a bunch of other nutritional values. So there's a bunch of cafes in the US making it into hot tea. So we said, well, why don't we turn it into an iced tea? Like, why can't we do that? And we've been playing around with it for about a year, and we're launching a carbonated, like a sparkling iced tea out of cascara. So we're using a product that is being upcycled that was traditionally tossed out. We're supporting the farmers more. We're using the same supply chain that we've been using, and we utilize our equipment, and it allows our brand to grow outside of cold brew coffee. So we did our nutritional testing, and there's actually there's more potassium per can than a banana. Like, there's a ton of nutritional benefits, and it tastes amazing, and it's a clean ingredient deck. And we're really stoked about that.
Is that nationwide right now?
We're literally canning it. Like, our cans showed up today.
It's that new. Okay.
To be canned on Tuesday. So we've been pitching it to retailers for the past 3 months. It'll start to roll out at the end of next week, which is really exciting.
Yeah, no, Mitch, it's and I'm not ending anything anytime soon, because we've bounced around, we've covered a variety of topics here, and if you don't mind, I'd love for you to. You've been very open about parts of your personal life, but now I just feel like you're this full being. You got this job that's paying your bills. You're passionate about it. Well, paying your bills. You got a roof over your head. I can see.
Yeah, I'm good.
How do you juggle it? I always like to talk to people. We all have this picture of success and CEOs, I guess. I mean, I guess that's not your title, but you're one of 3 dudes at the top of a company.
Exercise is important to me, both physically and mentally, for sure. I think we've done a really good job from the beginning of making sure that for ourselves, as well as our team, that we're balancing as best as possible. There's no question that there are times where I need to take care of stuff, but I would say that I work a lot, but we're trying to work smart too. Now, we all do different jobs, and that requires different things. But there are times, like in the summer when we're doing lots of events, some of us might work every day for a couple of weeks in a row because we do events on weekends. But this summer was the first time that I didn't have to be at every event, which was great because our team is growing, but I also kind of want to be at every event. And it's, I think that's something that's really been a good.
You get some enjoyment, but you get more fear out of someone screwing up your.
It's hard to let go, for sure. Yeah, but man. That's part of it is letting go and trusting that you've put the right people in the right places to. I've picked up drawing again. I've mentioned it a couple of times, so I'm really starting to understand what other creative outlets do I have outside of work. And Ryan, I saw that you have I think I saw you had an iPad and you got an Apple Pencil. So I'm recently just jumped in and bought one of these, and I've been using this program called Procreate, and I'm really into hand lettering and typography.
It's called Procreate.
Yeah. It's called Procreate.
I'm actually working on a coffee flavor wheel of my own right now on Procreate that I started last night. That's funny.
What are you talking about? A flavor wheel?
Oh, well,
you're talking about a pie chart or something?
Yeah.
Showing a spectrum of flavors of coffee.
You don't know what a coffee flavor wheel is, man?
So just for perspective,
even if I did, I would pretend I didn't, just to get you to expand on it.
This is the type of stuff that I'm playing around with. Oh, this is amazing. I don't know what Ryan's doing here.
Ryan's trying to educate Mike. This is really what the show is normally about. Ryan just talks about things I don't know about and then makes me look like an idiot.
The Canadian in me wants to say that you spelled flavor wrong.
Oh, yeah, right? Yeah, where's you? Where's the you? Yeah, this is kind of what I figured you meant when you said the flavor wheel.
So I'm like playing around with Procreate. And again, like I said, I'm like, I used to draw a lot as a kid. And so I recognized that was something that was missing. And that's something that I spend some of my free time doing, just because it brings me a lot of joy. And like we talked about before, it actually puts me into a bit of a meditative, flow state where I'm just kind of like, nothing else matters. I put my phone in the other room and I just like put my head down and put on some good tunes and just kind of like let the creativity flow, which has been nice. So it's funny. Like I have an easier time talking about the challenges than I do like the wins. And I don't know why that is, but.
And I mean, honestly, Mitch, it's been a pretty impressive rise in a short period of time. And I know you're not comfortable being up on a pedestal, so I'm not trying to put you there. I just mean, but when we met, we were in pretty different places.
For sure.
And it hasn't really been that long. And it's just so incredible to see. I mean, I don't know if you've listened to the other episodes, but I'm very fortunate, Ryan and I both are, in that we have a pretty awesome Rolodex of friends who have, achieved this ideal scenario of success and happiness, and the courage to step away from that comfort that not only you had, but you were surrounded by, right? Like that was your whole world, was everyone doing what you were doing. And I'm curious if, what 16-year-old Mitch, you're not wrestling. And I mean, at the moment you're doing a little bit of radio, but what do you think 16-year-old Mitch should think about 34-year-old Mitch? 35?
35.
Yeah, you're 35. Sorry, bro.
I think he'd be pretty impressed, to be honest. Like, it takes a lot for me to say that, actually, because it's not easy. But I would like to think that 16-year-old Mitch would be like, damn, like, I mean, 16-year-old Mitch was also like 240 pounds, and now I'm like $180. But besides that, there's a bunch of other reasons I think he'd be pretty proud.
Perseverance would have come through regardless of whether 16-year-old Mitch thought coffee was cool or not. Or, I have to imagine that you were creative as a kid. You mentioned drawing and you mentioned, creating as a kid, like those pieces to be able to command that into your career and then make it your own freaking career. That's a big deal that way. You give back. You got like interns. You guys got interns now. Do you, are you like a big brother in some way, or like, how do you start making that transition? Right.
We've been a part of the creation of this incredible community of young entrepreneurs in the food and beverage space. And, we see ourselves, or we see each other at events and trade shows. And, we've built this great, supportive, understanding community that we help each other out.
Yeah.
And, I was on a call yesterday with the founder of this amazing company from Quebec, who just raised, $2.5 million, and picking his brain. And, at the end, I'm just like, had this moment where I was like, I'm so happy that I can pick up the phone and call somebody like that who can give us advice on our fundraise. And with that being so evident for me, whenever anybody asks me those questions, I'm always making time for it.
Just on the topic of the network you have of kind of colleagues, other entrepreneurs, small businesses. That's one of the things, man, I miss so much about Toronto. It's just the elbows you're rubbing with on a daily basis. I forget, you're not a Toronto kid, are you? Like, did you grow up in the city?
So I was born here, but I lived outside the city. And then I actually, my mom got remarried and I moved to Niagara Falls. So I spent my high school in Niagara Falls.
So you can appreciate, you know how it is. Like, people that grow up in the city, they just assume that's what life is like, But I grew up in the suburbs. Ryan grew up even more rural than the suburbs, I think. And like that networking, that access to those, I would say that is one of the hardest things to appreciate when you're in it. When you're in the water, it's hard to tell the temperature of it. But man, do you have a lot of like just random people kind of reach out nowadays? Because again, you as in your position with the company, I feel like, the marketing sales, that stuff, you're kind of more the face than the other two guys, you know? And I don't know if that's intentional or not. I'm just saying, generally, your feeds, you know, I know you handle some of the social media stuff, or you did at some point. Do you have a lot of people reach out to you specifically, kind of looking for that guidance that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. I would say that, we do our best to make sure that all three of us are showcased in our own, rights. And I think that, I think if you ask that same question to Steve or Mike, they would say the same thing. Just
for sure,
they would have people in their own realm reaching out. So I know that Mike has an amazing community of specifically like beer brewers, because we use a lot of the same equipment.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so he's got a great community of people. Like, even there's a company here who does mobile canning, right, for all the small little craft breweries who can't afford their own canning machine. Whenever our canning line goes down, he calls them right away, and they come in and they help out. Like, it's mine is just a little bit different, and Steve's, talking to other CEOs about raising money and stuff like that. And he's got his own network, and mine is a little bit more about, the brand and the sort of like external way that the brand looks. And so, yeah, there's a lot of people who reach out to us, but I do the same to others. So it's like,
that's paying it forward, right? That's all I'm getting at, and you don't, I don't know. I don't think any of us start off with those aspirations, right? We're just trying to cover our own ass and put one foot in front of the other. But to get to that other side, I mean, I've had conversations with my brother, on the podcast, who's a recovering addict, and he takes his sobriety incredibly seriously. And, his life nowadays it's as much about running a large business as it is about being a part of that community that ultimately saved his life, that ultimately gave him this opportunity to be where he is now. And I know you're not coming from that place, but now that you're in this community of, kind of other small businesses and entrepreneurs, it's awesome to see you taking advantage of that. And, like I said, more importantly, paying it forward to answering those calls when they come in.
For sure. We, and a good example that I'll leave this part of the conversation with is there was a kid who reached out to us last year. And his email was basically, I'm here visiting family for 6 months and doing a bit of work. I'm from India. I'm so intrigued by coffee and what you guys are doing. I want to work with you guys. And we get a lot of these, and it's hard to reply to all of them.
Wow.
But there was just something in me that was like, I want to give this kid like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And he came in and we chatted, and he ended up working for us for like 6 months.
Really?
And literally would do any job, and was like on the packaging line, he put us in his all of a sudden he followed us on Instagram and followed me on Instagram. And then like in his profile, it said like works at Station Cold Brew. And he was like so proud. And you know what? Like I had this moment where I was like, I put myself in his shoes, and I was like, I'm just going to give this kid 5 minutes. And it led to introducing him to Mike, and then Mike hired him. And then it just and he had a blast. And who knows, maybe he'll start a beverage company in India now, because he got a little taste of it. And that felt really good. We can't do that always, but.
No, and I wish we could, right? But that's such a beautiful, that's the sentiment of starting a company. We've been talking about beverages and technicalities, but man, it's such an incredible thing to be able to, like I keep saying, pay it forward and give that back. I think that has a lot more to do with your happiness than your bank account.
Yep.
Personal opinion, but unfortunately, Mitch, you two have lives, and I know it's entering that time of the evening. It's almost 11 o'clock here for me, so I do think we can wrap it up on that note. I can't thank you enough, Mitch. Like, your story,
it's great, man.
All our guests, man. Like, I want one person to hear this and think like, man, maybe I can take that leap too. Mitch, you turned out all right, brother. I'm really happy for you, dude.
My mom tells me I turned out all right, so.
Well, I'm sure she does, but I don't have to tell you that.
Yeah, things are pretty good, and again, like I said before, it's really nice to have these conversations to be reminded of that and give some credit to some of the bullshit I've been through, and and on that note, like it's funny because then I oftentimes go into moments or really you haven't been through that much, Mitch. Like who are you to say like what you've been through? But everybody's got their own experiences, and some are tougher than others, and you just can't compare.
Well, there's a whole streaming lifestyle that exists of murder shows and these real jacked up stories. And then there's all of these stories about like rags to riches perfectly, right? Mm-hmm. And the perfect rags to rich story, I think, is really cool for like an episodic TV show or some shit like this. But the reality is, like, most of us are somewhere in between. So like our parentheses are like here, whereas like there's that extended parenthesis for like how I met a murderer, or how I grew up in third world country and became an entrepreneur here, or whatever it might be. So it's a really big deal, I think, at least for our listeners who reach out in a similar way. And to be able to kind of like hear real life stories and then how that affects the rest of their worlds, right? Because scrolling and looking at news stories, a lot of times you get to see or hear how people are successful. A lot of what you shared today, steps 2 or 3 paces past how you're like becoming successful in your product, right? We define some of those buzzwords and some of those things that people might not necessarily understand from their internal association with them, like, consumer product goods and things. But the reality is that like we all have those 2 or 3 steps past what we do at work. And we're not that different, man. We're
behind the scenes, man. We're all
a lot of it starts with like, going back to your VP and like saying what you need to say. And then, going to however you earn those next steps of your business, and the 3 of you guys saying what you need to say. So
Mike, I'm really happy you reached out and that we organized this. I can't think of a better way to finish. It's like 5:00 here. So finish my work week. Going into it, it's Thanksgiving weekend here in Canada. So
yes, happy Thanksgiving.
We've got a long weekend, so I can't think of a better way to go into the weekend, getting to know you, Ryan, and Mike, catching up. This was great.
I really appreciate it.
I promise I will not visit Toronto again without seeing you. I'll do a better job of reaching out in advance.
I wasn't going to bring that up, but
bring it up. No, that ain't cool. If you come to Hawaii and I don't see you, I'm going to ship you a package of something.
Kona coffee.
So I promise. Next time I'm in the region, Mitch, let's hook up for sure. Cool. And I don't know, find an excuse to come out here. Isn't it like a business trip? Come to a big island. I'll meet you there. We can drink coffee.
Trust me, it's very high on the list to get back there. So obviously, if I do, you guys are first on the list.
One thing that I want to make sure we finish up with here is, if I want to find you, find your coffee, find your social media feeds, what's the best way, and kind of be like in that order. I don't know if I can order coffee here in the States. I know that we have a ton of Canadian listeners, but like what's the best way to get in touch with you or to find your products out there?
So in terms of the products, only available in Canada, as Mike said, for now, but we are building, a much greater story, which does involve growth into the US. Hawaii is a different story. Instagram is always just the easiest and best way. It's at Station Cold Brew. We're pretty active on it. Most of the time, I'm the one answering direct messages. Cool. Which I actually enjoy most of the time. We've got a great social media coordinator as well who works with me. But and then my personal Instagram is just my name, Mitchell Stern, which is generally stuff about mental health or drawing or the Buckeyes.
Touche.
Yeah.
I think I saw somewhere where your product is available at 7-Eleven in a lot of places across Canada. So certainly an easy venue to find. Your people who are listening to our show, we're always looking to pick up listeners or subscribers. But Mitchell, for the people who are listening to tune into you, we're at conventioNOT _podcast on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff. Really, really appreciate you coming on and hope to be talking to you in the future. I think we're starting to put together how our show looks in the future, how our brand develops. I was looking through my Procreate app, and ironically, or maybe not ironically, the way that we made the show pictures where Mike and I are facing each other and kind of doing this fist bump over a microphone. It was actually constructed in Procreate itself. So shout out Procreate, the Apple Pencil and the Apple iPad.
That's the worst name of a product I've ever heard. Like that.
I disagree because now we're talking about it.
Did they not run that by anyone though? Like, I mean, that's a specific word. It has a very specific definition.
My wife and I have had this conversation several times about Procreate, and the decision, Mitch, is exactly what you said. Oh, we're talking about it. There's 20 drawing apps. I've downloaded 18 of them. I use freaking Procreate, man. Like, it's just, part of it's the name.
Next company I start is just going to be called Orgasm. What? What are you going to sell?
Here we go. No, I see how you did that. How you made fun of marketing again. Okay.
Come on.
I'm
I would never.